Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 440, The Power and Prominence of Virtue. Understanding why we must unlock and wield the powers of the Spirit if we are to survive these last days. The podcast objectives are analyze the power of your victory over contempt, analyze why many are under a great deception of power, and analyze the power and prominence of virtue. If we have power to overcome. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 267 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the conditions which would cause the Holy Spirit to leave us in conjunction with our victory over defilement. In doing so, I have now shown you how virtue defeats the spirit of contempt at the detailed level. To wit, I have shown you how honesty defeats dishonesty, how righteousness defeats unrighteousness, and how purification defeats defilement. And thus, the war you have fought for many days between virtue and contempt will finally be over. You, my friend, have gained the victory. You have defeated the focal source of debility. And now, this ancient terror is history. For that reason, we should consider all we have learned about virtue via the table to the right. By definition, virtue is moral excellence, which elicits conformity to a standard of ethical principles and produces an effective force that can defeat any opposing power. And the primary objective of virtue is to choose the Father's will in every situation. Now, the amazing prospects of virtue lie in the fact that virtue cannot be defeated by any opposing force. This stems from the reality that good will always triumph over evil. Virtue, then, is the demonstration of goodwill in the earth, while contempt is the demonstration of evil in the earth. Brothers and sisters, I don't think I could be any clearer as I say, this is huge vis-a-vis by unlocking the power of virtue. We are directly connected to the eternal force of goodwill, which Yahuwah has harnessed since the beginning of time. And as I have said before, and often, we will need to operate in this power during the great distress. Listen to me. We will need a good deal of goodwill to endure the second great Exodus and every event required for us to enter the renewed promised land. Here is why. The scriptures confirm that there will be many forces against us in these last days. And the only way we will defeat these forces is if we have the power to overcome them. They chose death over life. Now, I do attest this declaration of power is not only scriptural and spiritually sound. My dear friends, Yahuwah has revealed these matters to me in my office as a watchman. The Ruach has shown me what is coming. I have seen days in our future. I understand the forces we will be up against in those days, and I am not the only one. To summarize, we have seen millions of men and women in this nation across the world being slaughtered by the enemy during the Great Distress. Now, the obvious reason why they will all die is sure. It's because they don't have the seal of Elohim. Notwithstanding, we must take a deeper look at the implications associated with not having the seal. And to our good fortune, we can provide a summary of these implications to make this complex matter less complex. Consider this. No one will be able to operate with the powers of the Ruach during the Great Distress unless they have the seal of Elohim. Now, I get it. This is not groundbreaking information, and yet it is super critical because many are not considering it. Alas, many don't consider how their inability to operate with the powers of the Ruach today is a red flag as it pertains to their ability to operate with these powers tomorrow in the evil day. My dear friends, they don't see how their inability to engage the Father in effectual prayer today is an indicator that he will not hear them tomorrow during the time of the great distress. Not only this, but they are oblivious to the infinite value of the seal of Elohim. And this should be no surprise, for their ignorance and delusion is by design. And yet, it has been given unto us to know the mysteries of the kingdom of Elohim. And thus, I call upon every man, woman, and child within the renewed nation of Israel to receive this revelation. And I encourage you to share it as you are led. The seal of Elohim has two primary purposes in these last days. First and foremost, it is to place an indicator upon the chosen elect, so the angels of death know who to kill and who to spare during the great distress. Secondly, it is to empower the chosen elect to defeat the forces of evil and every weapon formed against us in these last days. For those of you who may be halted between two or more opinions concerning these matters, let me state that I appreciate the mental conflict you may be going through. But let me tell you something. The first step in defeating the enemy is asking yourself, what does he want me to think? Brothers and sisters, ask yourself, what does the enemy want me to believe? Clearly, the enemy does not want you to believe you will need power to survive in these last days. Why? It's because if you believe this, then you will be like me. My dear friend, you will unlock every power faculty of the Ruach, and you won't wait for the day of distress to operate. Quite the contrary, you will initiate your operations now in a relatively good day. On the other hand, there is a great deception that operating in the powers of the Spirit is an elective. What is worse, many within the dying nation of Israel are being led by Satan to question and denounce the powers of the Spirit altogether. Now, here again, the question you should be asking yourself is, why? Why is the enemy investing so much of his time and energy deceiving many concerning Yahuwah's will for his children to operate in his power in accordance to his will? The answer is sure. It's because a storm is coming over all the earth. And I can only imagine how much worse things will be in 3 months when I release this podcast. FYI, I create every podcast 3 months before I post it. And so I am writing this literature in December of 2024. That said, what you need to know now is sure. Satan is going to destroy millions within this nation for the simple but dangerous fact that they cannot operate in the powers of the Ruach. And the primary reason why they cannot operate in these powers is because the enemy has deceived them into believing A, these powers are not real, or B, they don't need to operate in these powers to survive in these last days. To their great delusion, they believe the Most High will magically carry everyone through the great distress, and we will all live happily ever after. My dear friends, not only is this counter scripture, it's not even spiritually sound, for there is no precedence. Quite the contrary. The precedent is you will reap what you sow, and only great investments yield great rewards. Ergo, if you don't sow seeds of virtue, you will not reap the power required for you to defeat all the forces of darkness that are preparing themselves today for the ultimate battle tomorrow. My dear friends, you must believe me. There is an anti-power movement in this nation, and it is being orchestrated by Satan himself. And the reality of this counter operation brings us to the heart of the matter, which I will offer as an inflection point. Consider this. The primary reason why many men and women are under this great deception of power is because they can't use it. Now, this depressed reality begs the question, why can't they use the powers of the Spirit? Classically, there are two primary reasons why this is the case. First and foremost, it is because these individuals are defiled. To wit, they have not mastered the first 12 degrees of holiness. And in not doing so, they're being plagued by 12 of the deadliest degrees of lawlessness. Per the image to the left, they had not unlocked the powers of faith, obedience, and virtue. This includes the powers of hope, trust, reliance, compliance, conformance, transformation, honesty, righteousness, and purification. Think about that for a moment. I just named off 12 very prominent degrees of holiness and 12 very prominent powers of the Spirit. And many of those who are being deceived by the enemy have not mastered one. Here lies the inflection. To wit, they had not unlocked the power of honesty. Ergo, instead of conceding the fact that their lack of power is a direct result of their lack of spiritual mastery, they will, in the spirit of dishonesty, attack and disparage the powers of the set-apart spirit of Elohim. My dear friends, this is why Yahuwah led me to refer to these individuals as the dying nation of Israel. For spiritual power is the most prominent sign of spiritual life. And thus, by refusing to follow the precepts of mastery and Yahushua's example of perfection in the spirit, these individuals have chosen death over life. Heretofore, I recommend that you take my advice. Don't be deceived. Elohim is not mocked. If you think you can forfeit the power of his spirit by refusing to follow the standard of his only brought forth son, and then somehow call upon him to guard you during the hour of temptation that is coming upon all the earth, you are gravely mistaken. What is worse, you are under a great delusion that is designed to kill you, for you have been gravely deceived. And when that awful day does surely come, and Yahuwah makes it plain to you that you do not have his spirit or his seal, you are going to die. What then will you believe? When half the world is fast asleep. Now, that was only the first reason. The second reason why many cannot use the powers of the Spirit is because they are complacent. Now, I know what many of you may be thinking vis-a-vis, if someone is defiled, that implies they are also complacent. And you are quite correct. For where there is no defilement, there can be no complacency. Shout out to the linear model of holiness. Notwithstanding, I am making the case for complacency for two primary reasons. First of all, it's because we have witnessed a phenomenon of slothful servants in this nation. And perhaps some may disagree that it is indeed a phenomenon upon first look. And thus, I ask you to look again. And this time, don't focus on what you see. Rather, focus on the time we are living in and consider this. If there was ever a time in the history of our world not to be slothful, that time is today. My dear friends, you must believe me. Everything is at stake. Everything is on the line. The fate of 8 billion people will be determined in the upcoming months. And despite this fact, more than half the world is spiritually fast asleep. This brings me to my second reason as to why complacency is such a critical factor as it pertains to a lack of power within our nation. It is because those who are complacent are not being transformed. And what do we know about transformation? Vis-a-vis, transformation is the one and only degree of holiness that opens the door for us to master all the rest. Ergo, if you are not being transformed, you are getting nowhere in your quest. This speaks to the power and the prominence of virtue. To wit, once we unlock the power of transformation, the first thing Yahuwah wants us to do is to unlock the focal power of his spirit to transform ourselves into virtuous men and women. Now, the question we should be asking ourselves is, why? Why is it so important to the Most High Elohim that we unlock the focal power of the Ruach as the first order of the business of transformation? The answer is sure. It's because the enemy is using all his powers to prevent us from being transformed into the spiritual image and likeness of Yahushua Messiah. Ergo, we need power to fight back and to resist him so we can keep the transformation process going in our lives until we achieve the spiritual standard of our loving master. And thus, Yahuwah, in his infinite wisdom, kindness, and love, has designed for us to unlock the most prominent power of his spirit as a priority in our quest. Brothers and sisters, he has given us the opportunity to have direct access to the greatest power in the world. Now, the true contenders for the seal of Elohim will hear this, and they will prepare themselves to do whatever it takes to unlock this great power. For we know we will not survive in these last days without it. And so, to close out this series on virtue and contempt, we will take one final look into the power of virtue, focusing on its primary illustrations as we have done for obedience and faith. And we'll begin with the upcoming podcast. Yahuwah bless you until then. Now, here is the final word. Give yourself to prayer every hour, lest you fall victim to the deception of power. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, if there ever was a day for us to be constantly in prayer, that day is today. For look, listen, it has been written, men should always pray and not faint. Notwithstanding, the issue is often not our willingness to say a prayer. Quite the contrary. The issue is the quality of our prayers. It is the effectiveness of our prayers. It is the depressing reality that the prayers of many are not effective. They do not generate the desired result in accordance with the Father's will. As I have said before, this fault leads to an even greater fault. Vis-a-vis, many have given up their pursuit of an effectual prayer life. And in doing so, they have forfeited the greatest power given to man. That is, the great power of virtue. For it is the focal source of all effectual prayer. And if you think you will survive these last days without the power of an effectual prayer life, I advise you to think it over and fast. Trust me, the eternal destiny of every man, woman, and child is being determined even now. My dear friends, you must believe me. Many will wake up one day in the near future and their fate will be sealed. There will be nothing they can do to change the fact that the time to make our calling and election sure will have come and gone. Heretofore, I recommend, don't underestimate the power of virtue. For if you sow seeds of his power, then his power you will reap. And he will carry you through the great distress, while half the world is fast asleep. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. We covered a lot of material, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 440, The Power and Prominence of Virtue. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 441, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 1. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, March 26, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.